You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast.
The hunger to improve the community in which people live is astounding. Africa is a continent full of people hungry for knowledge, and that hunger is a great motivator. Around the world, they make a mistake in thinking that business support is all about the money. Government, yes, collects money to do great work, but government is also servant of the people. I'm extremely positive about the humanity that is found in Africa, that spirit of wanting to work together.
Stay tuned as we bring you inspiring people who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast with your host, Tessa Adamu.
Welcome to the Unlocking Africa podcast, where we find brilliant people who are doing brilliant things to unlock Africa's economic potential. Today, we have another special guest. We have Zucchi, who is an investor, entrepreneur, and founder of Startup Tribe. Welcome to the podcast, York. How are you?
Teresa, it's an absolute pleasure to be on the show. I think we're both driven by the same passion for the continent, and we see the opportunities. But I think the magic about the continent is its diversity. You can really see anything you want to see. So I hope today we can unpack different perspectives, different views, and have a proper lively debate about what's really happening on the ground.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to that. If you've ever listened to the podcast, I usually like to start from the beginning just to give people a bit of an insight into the guest on the podcast. So if you don't mind, do you mind introducing yourself and just telling us a little bit about Zucchi?
Sure. Let me give you a 30-second version, not to bore anybody. So originally born in Switzerland, grew up in many countries. I started working because, like most youth, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I worked for 16 years for various banks around the world, including Goldman Sachs, in 11 countries. I then moved to South Africa in 2007, where I started 9 businesses, 7 of which failed within 9 months. And the 8th one, which I thought was the worst idea ever, ended up employing 1,800 people.
Wow.
And the 9th one ended up being used in 83 countries. So I have experienced both the large corporate environment and the entrepreneurship environment, and love the power of entrepreneurship to give hope, to help people own their own destiny. So I really see the future of Africa married to the word entrepreneurship and in all its possibilities.
Thank you for giving us insight into your journey from the corporate world into entrepreneurship and how you came about into your journey into Africa in 2007. So if you don't mind me asking, what is it about Africa that drew you in or brought you to the continent in 2007?
Well, in 2007, I was at Goldman Sachs in London. And back then, I had a colleague called Jim O'Neill, and he advised me that the world's attention really was turning towards Africa. You know, it's easy today to dismiss certain things, but back then, the headlines weren't exactly positive.
No, they weren't.
Exactly. And so it doesn't really matter if they're not reflective of what's happening on the ground. The reality is that the press chose to focus on specific areas, and not blaming the press, but sometimes it's easier to sell bad news than it is to sell positive news. And he said, look, pay attention. There's a lot of funds and funders and organizations starting to pay attention to the continent's potential. So I said, okay, let me pack up my luggage, go down there. And of course, when you come from large corporate, you think you know everything. And that's why I jokingly, I often tell people, if you want to fail an initiative quickly, learn from me. I know how to.
Brilliant. Part of your journey, or something I find extremely exciting, is that you're currently assisting over 312 cities and municipalities across 27 countries with tools to help them and their citizens to start and grow their businesses. With your experience working in Africa, what have you observed that is unique about African entrepreneurship that you don't really see elsewhere?
I love that question. It's so powerful because it taps into this incredible hunger on the continent, and of course we generalize, to speak of Africa as if it was one country is absolutely silly. But for the purpose of having a discussion, let's assume that there is such a thing as Africa.
Yes.
The hunger for wanting to make something out of one's lives, the hunger to improve the community in which people live is astounding. Now, the difference, if I was to be horrible in a horrific generalization to many other regions, is that the support infrastructure for aspiring entrepreneurs is almost non-existent. You and I know that there's lots of acceleration programs, financing for the next fintech, edutech, insurtech, agritech. It doesn't matter what word you want to use. So there's lots of funding available for the bright, next unicorns and so forth. But for the majority of people, there is nothing. Hell, there's hardly electricity, and in many cases, there's not even running water. And so to even think that there's financing, funding, incubation, mentoring, all of these initiatives are often provided ad hoc, sporadically, as either do good initiatives or marketing PR stunts, or mandated by government spending where they have to do something. But it doesn't really reach the people. And that's why, when you and I chatted a while back, when we were brainstorming, we were chatting about what is Africa. Africa is a continent full of people hungry for knowledge. And that hunger usually is a great motivator for the next step in the evolution of aspiring to actual entrepreneurship.
I agree 100%. A lot of our work is focused within Africa. We work extensively on the continent. And we know that the continent is full of opportunities, but a lot of these are hidden and difficult to access. I think from my personal experience, a lot of people that I've observed are not seeing the potential of trading amongst themselves, trading in communities, seeing what value that they can actually add within their communities. Sometimes we're guilty of trying to look too far ahead and not understanding in terms of how we can scale or start a business through the small means or the small access to capital or finance that is available. Obviously, finance is a challenge a lot of the times when people are going into entrepreneurship or trying to start a business. One thing I've always kind of advised people is use the resources around you, use your local community, use people that can actually help you to leverage your skills, mentorship, community. Yeah, from the very basic or fundamental level, that's something that I've kind of tried to champion as much as possible.
And I absolutely love what you're saying, because I think many people on the ground, and not just in Africa, around the world, they make a mistake in thinking that business support, meaning an investor, is all about the money, somebody who writes your check so that you can start and grow your business. When in actual fact, exactly to your point about involving a community,
yes,
somebody's spare capacity might be what you desperately need. Maybe you have a couple of boxes you need to store and somebody has spare warehousing facility. Maybe it's a bakkie, a little, a truck that goes one way to deliver vegetables but comes back empty, on which you can piggyback for transporting goods or something else. Maybe it's expertise, somebody who has a network in a specific organization that can open doors for you. So the idea that we need money is, yes, if you look at it carefully, is often you probably only need about 25 to 40% of the money you actually think you need. Because most often it's a case of, well, I need an office, okay? Do you really need to pay the overheads of an office, or can you use somebody else's spare desk? No, I need a warehousing. I need a new laptop. Is it not somebody who's got a second-hand machine that is not used? And so forth. If you start thinking more critically about the shopping list that you want to spend money on, if you look at that shopping list, I would venture that quickly, within 10 minutes, 50% of those items are available for free or for a fraction of a price in the market.
I agree 100%. And I guess with entrepreneurship, you have to be quite dynamic, adaptable, and flexible in terms of your approach. I guess that's the beauty of being an SME and being an entrepreneur. And I guess the distinction between SME and the informal sector or economy are sometimes slightly blurred. Obviously, a huge percentage of Africa's economy falls within the informal economy, and sometimes it's an area that is largely, I wouldn't say ignored, but not prioritized. What are your thoughts in terms of, is the informal economy here to stay, or is it something that we will see diminishing in size or adapting or evolving, so to speak?
Well, I mean, you had Gigi Alcock as a guest, I think, a couple of weeks back.
Yes.
And he speaks much more eloquently about the informal economy than I do. But for those who didn't listen to the podcast, it's a mind-blowing power, both in terms of opportunities on the ground, in terms of societal growth, in terms of contribution to GDP, in terms of career. I say it in the loose sense, in the sense of some of the people who sell sitting on the side of a road, so to speak, and have a little stand outside a school, make more money than a lot of the people who are employed full time in businesses. So I think the informal economy a misnomer. I think it's far more a formal part of the economy. It may be informal in the sense that it's not formally registered. It's not trading with a PTY limited. It doesn't have a point of sale system the way we see it in shops and in bigger businesses. But there's nothing informal about the sophistication that a lot of traders, a lot of micro entrepreneurs run their business. That is operations that we can be blown away by in terms of logistics, preparedness, in terms of pricing, sophistication. You know, if you and I set up a business in the UK and we get a few products wrong, we might be able to survive. If one of those informal traders starts selling stuff that nobody wants, they go out of business quickly. So they are much more in tune with what the market wants and needs. So I sometimes think it's a bit of a derogatory term to call it informal, because it's a huge, huge, huge component of the economy.
That's very true. I did have a similar conversation with Gigi Alcock in terms of the phrasing or the term of the informal economy. And a point that you touched upon there is that people often see or characterize the informal economy as being chaotic, disorganized, but it's extremely structured. It has a hierarchy. It has a very in-depth and, I guess, definite value chain and supply chain. And its customer base is well informed, well educated in terms of product quality, what quantity they want, and price points, which is extremely important. So with that in mind, with an economy that is so important, why does it not receive some of the support it should receive to enable it to thrive and to contribute to certain African economies? What's your thoughts on that?
So look, we work with 27 governments, and the feeling is that it should be more recognized and supported. And I think the tide is changing. Historically, you are absolutely right. The informal economy was dismissed, but it wasn't dismissed because it's not important. It was incentivized in the wrong way. So those who are mandated to create laws, regulation, the tax systems, and so forth, wanted to formalize the informal economy as quickly as possible. In other words, they went to a trader and said, look, we don't provide you any value, but we want you to set up a PTY limited, a company. We want you to become a taxpayer. We want you to set up contracts with staff and labor and unions and pay VAT, that comes later, but pay your taxes and everything. And then formal traders looking at the government and saying, hold on a second, you want me to do all this, add workload, pay more taxes, but you give me nothing in return. Well, where's the value proposition here? So we have to be fair also to the, let's call it informal economy, that if you as a government want them to become formal and register their business and start contributing to the tax, that you need to offer value for it. Government, yes, collects money to do great work, but government is also servant of the people. And so make it easier. And I see it in many countries as great things that are happening in terms of creating more value to informal traders, to the entrepreneurs that are not yet on the radar screen.
Fantastic. I love that. As you just mentioned, it's about adding value both ways. And I love the work that you do in terms of what you mentioned is that a big part is supporting or advising governments, whether it's with entrepreneurs, whether it's with the informal economy. So I was wondering if you could give us a bit more insight in terms of what type of advice do you give in terms of, is it writing policy? Is it creating initiatives to inform in terms of how to work or how to reach out or how to coordinate activities or access to finance for entrepreneurs or within the informal economy?
Look, I don't think it's rocket science. I don't really give advice to the macro level. I always, if anything, suggest that when we look at a city, a municipality, a country's offerings, there are thousands of incredible initiatives available to people. Some are very localized, some are more national or provincial, and some are more global. Even the work that you're doing on the continent in supporting entrepreneurs and young people, it's amazing, but how do people find you? How do they get to know about these initiatives? I come from a school that says you don't need to spend more money. You just centralize all these amazing tools and resources and free accounts and the bookkeeping services and support structures. If you want more people to access finance, well, give them a free bookkeeping tool that makes their life easier so that they can show historical records to organizations that give financing. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You don't need to handhold an entrepreneur all the way. We as entrepreneurs, by virtue of the learning journey, are going to fail. So there's nothing you can do as a government, as an organization, to stop us from failing. What you can do is help us get on our feet quicker, help us structure our administrative side, meaning bookkeeping, meaning onboarding, meaning documents which we can use as templates, contracts which we can download for free and use to sign for new clients. Make it easier to find all these amazing resources so that we don't have to spend too much time figuring and reinventing the wheel, but rather figuring out how to find clients, sell and deliver a great service.
I agree 100%. It's about creating an enabling environment to allow the private sector to thrive. And as you just touched on quite beautifully there, it's about providing the tools and resources and that support structure. Because I think within Africa, especially as you said, entrepreneurs don't need hand-holding. A lot of times when we talk about the talent issue within Africa, it doesn't have a talent issue. It has what I would call a skills relevancy issue. In terms of, is the education system fit for purpose to prepare the future labour force within Africa? I mean, what's your experience or thoughts on this?
Well, I'll share my experience, but what is your view on this?
Yes, I mean, my view on it is that one of the biggest challenges or one of the biggest areas of focus that we need to kind of prioritize in Africa is the education system. The education system is not preparing people for the future or the current job market. I think we definitely need to be looking to the future in terms of where do we envisage Africa being in the next 10, 20 years, and what are the mechanisms that we see taking us there, whether it's agriculture, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's entrepreneurship. What are the skills that are going to enable the next generational labour force to work adequately within those systems to benefit the economies of whether it's Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, Egypt, South Africa?
That's exactly it. And what are the skills? And I don't think, certainly I'm not qualified to tell you what the future in 20 years is going to be. Who knew what blockchain is 20 years ago? So, and
very true.
What I can tell you is what I'm seeing in some schools in Africa and in Europe is that they're moving away from forcing young people to learn, memorize, and spit something out at verbatim, meaning completely memorized back onto an exam paper, towards a system which says, let me teach you how to navigate the real world with specific tasks. And when you come back with experiences. So, for example, there was a school, I was the director of a school, and he says, rather than me teaching you a formula, giving you the data set, and then you applying the formula in Excel to analyze a data set, I send out the kids and I say, okay, go and find a source where you can find this data. So the kids have to go out in the city, have to speak to departments, look at websites, find the data, and then have to analyze it and then come back. Now, just that little steps adds a degree of, okay, now I also know how to do it. You know, it's not just an academic exercise, it's a practical exercise. And so, if anything, this world in which we're moving towards isn't a world where you need to memorize things anymore. Everything is available at your fingertip. It's a world where you need to figure to the people who are going to be successful are those who are going to manage to figure out how to get something done. And the reason I'm so incredibly optimistic about Africa or Africa's people is that that is a continent where people, out of survival needs perhaps, have lived a life of figuring it out how to do something with minimum resources. Now, if we add to that the ingredients of knowledge, of knowing where to get resources, that's why when you say the thirst for knowledge is there, we don't have to teach attitude to people on the continent. We don't have to teach personal strength of character, the shit people deal with on a daily basis, goes to shame most people around the world. We don't have to handhold or pretend people are stupid. There's just incredible raw energy waiting to be unleashed. All it needs is a bit of guidance, a few resources, knowledge, know-how that people can access, cheaper data, and then you'll see an explosion of Africa's talent.
I agree. And the point that I really connect with that you made there is that the people who are going to succeed or be successful are the ones that are going to figure it out. And I guess we're seeing evidence of that most celebrated or highlighted in areas such as tech, where we're seeing some very, very innovative solutions coming out that are providing, I guess, some solutions for challenges which are specific to the African continent. And with that, we're seeing new opportunities, new ideas, money flowing into the continent. But obviously, that is not always accessible by all people in the pyramid. With that in mind, one thing that always does concern me is that we talk about Africa's greatest strength being its growing population, and it's predicted that 20 million people will be added to the African workforce each year. One thing which I've struggled to understand is where are all these jobs going to come from to employ these new 20 million people? And obviously, entrepreneurship is a possibility. I'm no entrepreneur expert, so I might be a bit too optimistic. Is it realistic to provide these additional 20 million jobs through entrepreneurship?
Okay, so this is a contentious discussion because I come from a school that says there are no jobs. The world of work is not about finding employment. It's about selling your expertise to an organization.
Brilliant.
For a specific project. So the idea that you're going to find lifelong employment somewhere, or you can study something and that will be your job for life, is nonsensical. Now, there are certain professions where that might still be the case. But let's be realistic. Everything is going to be disrupted.
Yes.
So I don't think jobs will be the future. And I think the initiatives that drive employment up are actually a little bit nonsensical. I understand the political pressure. I understand that it's a popular thing, but that's not where the future is. However, I also want to caution that maybe the word entrepreneurship is too broad a term. So you and I might both be classified as entrepreneurs,
Yes.
but you might be a brilliant person who can, you are a brilliant person who has the abilities and talent to scale a business, where York is a solo entrepreneur who sells his expertise at fixing up old houses. And I have no idea how to employ people or finance the business or grow the business. But doesn't make me any lesser in the sense that I'm still an entrepreneur. So I do believe that the future is entrepreneurship if the definition of entrepreneurship is wide enough to accommodate both the solo entrepreneur as well as the entrepreneur who one day will employ 10, 20, 30 people.
And I guess scalability is an important part of that, because if you look at the millions of solo entrepreneurs, specifically on the continent, if they have the ability to scale and even just employ an additional one person after a couple of years, that would increase the opportunities out there for employment for people on the continent. And it's a contentious issue about finding work and selling your skills, but I guess it will give those people the opportunity to sell their skills to potentially be employed.
That's exactly it. Look at how many people apply for jobs, especially young people. Doesn't matter whether they stand a remote chance of getting it. Guys, you're not applying for a job. You're selling your energy, your attitude, your personality, your skills and experience if you have them. You're selling your hunger to learn skills and experience. Sell yourself. Figure out what you're good at. Hi, my name is York, and I'm applying for a job with a podcasting station because I love coordinating calendars, organizing people, making sure they come on time, researching topics, and so forth. Now, as opposed to, hi, I want to work for you. It's the former is I'm selling what I'm good at. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm selling my time in exchange for a bit of money so that you can deliver a better service. And the other one, I'm begging for a job. Hi, I'm looking for a job. Nobody wants to give you a job. They have priorities. They have a business to run. They have problems to solve. That's why I'm saying, even if you're listening to this and you're currently looking for a job, stop selling that you're looking for a job. Say, hey, this is what I'm good at. This is who I am. This is what I can do. This is what I've tried. Do you have a space for me? I'm looking for organizations. And figuring out what you do is not difficult. Ask your friends, ask people you work for, your teachers, ask people what they think you're good at. Your behavior speaks much more than what you think you're good at. I thought I was good at certain things, but actually I'm a catastrophe, absolute catastrophe at the things I thought I was good at. And after the 100th person who told me what really my strengths are, I started listening. I wish I listened earlier, but I'm a little bit stubborn.
Aren't we all in our own way? As you mentioned there, which is something that's extremely important, and I guess a key theme within our conversation, is that selling skills and what you're good at is the importance, or I guess the direction with which you should go from. And I guess within the current climate or environment, it's become a lot easier to do that. You've got platforms such as LinkedIn, which is how we met, which has enabled people such as yourselves and myself to celebrate what we do, celebrate others within our field, within our industry. And you're seeing a growing percentage or populations of African professionals being very visible and influential on platforms such as LinkedIn. If we look at that from an entrepreneurship angle, with the work you do, what role do you think technology has played in enabling entrepreneurs to start and sustain or scale their businesses in Africa?
It's interesting you mentioned LinkedIn and the social media and platforms. There was a beautiful paper published around how many people really use airplanes in the world.
Yes.
And I forget the exact stat, but if you and I instinctively would answer, no, a lot of people fly around the world. But the reality is less than 2% or 4% of the world's population has ever set foot on a plane.
Interesting.
That means 96 or 98%, I forget which is now, it has never even been to an airport. Yet, if we look at online, it would seem that thanks to the Ryanairs, the EasyJet, the Northwest, the Kululas of this world, that aviation is one of the most proliferating industries in the world. It's the same few people that are constantly flying all the time. So I'm not a believer that social media solves everything and that's where we should be. I do believe there's a value social media gives us, whether it's LinkedIn or other platform, it doesn't matter. Certainly you can connect, but if I look at a young person in a rural area with no bandwidth, no electricity, and water in the village, to ask them to go on LinkedIn to polish up their resume so they can access better opportunities is a stretch. Not that it's not possible. I'm just saying it won't feed the family tomorrow morning.
Very true.
However, there's nothing stopping us. For example, on the work we do, I don't mean to promote what we do, but we have a course called How to Start a Farm if you live in a shack. And it's a professor, Nord Malan, who teaches how to use the stuff that's all around you, other people's rubbish, to start a farm on a tiny plot, no bigger than a small office, and start growing crops and generate 180 to 250 euros a month in income. Now, with this 250 euros, it may not make you rich, but you start feeding yourself, feeding your family, you start growing things, you start learning about commerce, about trading, about patience, about seeding, about watering. And those are skills that you cannot learn just by watching a YouTube clip. And so the more people learn to do something in their circumstances, in their location, the more that is the academy that will help them to grow to the next ladder.
Yeah, I couldn't agree anymore. As we touched on at the beginning of the conversation, it's about working with what you have within your community, what's around you, what are your strengths, what are your networks, how can you leverage them to be able to get started. I guess the most important thing is getting started and actually starting the process of learning and educating yourself. It doesn't have to be formal. It could just be your education through starting a business. You learn sales, you learn marketing, you learn HR, you learn how to distribute, you learn communication tactics and negotiation tactics. So from you, what do you believe are some of the vital or key skills that are required to survive as an entrepreneur?
I mean, again, this is a broad discussion, but I think one has to look at the entrepreneurial journey. Somebody who has an idea and wants to see if that idea might have potential traction in the market has very different skill requirements and daily practical tasks that they need to do than somebody who wants to go now and employ its first employee, or somebody who wants to scale the business and open a new branch in another country or city. So I don't think there is a uniform answer. I think the school of entrepreneurship, the best graduates of that school are those that try and that are reasonably intelligent in saying, okay, I will not find funding. I will not get an investor. I will not be able to find an investor quickly. So if I can't, then how do I make my idea into a reality when I don't have resources? Now, in this day and age, anybody can open a website if they have a smartphone. There are hundreds of free internet service providers, Google Sites to mention one, Wix, WordPress. Some are incredibly simple. So if you have an idea, create a little website, a landing page, share it with 100 people, print out a little poster and put it on the side of shacks. See how many people go to that page and say, wow, you have that? I'm really keen to have it. You may not have that product yet, but with those 100 people who say, I really want it, you can now go to organizations and say, here's a list of 100 clients. If I could want to buy my sneakers, if I had the money to manufacture them, would you finance me that? Now that is a much better value proposition than going to organization and say, hey, I have an idea, I need money so that I can test the idea in the market. Why would somebody who's tasked with the responsibility of looking after money give you money when you haven't done the work? And the work in this day and age does not cost anything or cost extremely little. So I would say that the best school of entrepreneurship, the best school is a school of doing. Go out there. You may not grow the business immediately, but go out there, make yourself vulnerable, fall flat on your face, listen to what people are telling you, and then refine your idea until you have enough demand that people will actually invest in you.
Brilliant. I really enjoyed what you said there in terms of the beauty of websites and having an open internet that gives you access to people who you probably wouldn't have encountered previously is key. And obviously, one thing that I'm a big believer is in terms of open access, open markets, and that's why I'm extremely excited at things such as AFTA, which creates an integrated African and almost a open market as we are seeing or have seen in other trading blocs such as the EU and in Southeast Asia. And I think it will put Africa in a very positive trajectory going forward in terms of the movement of people, whether those are going for trading, whether it's for entrepreneurship, working in public sector, private sector.
Well, I mean, you've seen the development of a European Union over the years. And I mean, I am originally from Switzerland. I grew up in Italy.
Yes.
So what is your view on the EU's benefit today versus when it was just a bunch of countries in Europe?
I mean, you're seeing, obviously, being based in the UK and the challenges we've seen with Brexit, if you think of it from a very simplistic term of just travelling, you're seeing what are the challenges of being in the EU and of not being in the EU. There's a lot more friction points. And, you know, what we always try to thrive for in an efficient economy is to create as few friction points as possible, which is enabling whether it's trade, commerce, travel, movements of goods, people, services to thrive. So that's one thing which I've seen firsthand from experience of being in the EU and recently exiting the EU. Just the simple things of traveling to a neighboring country for a holiday is probably becoming slightly more challenging than it previously was. And that's why I'm a big supporter of things such as AFTA, because I think it will create plenty of opportunities in Africa. I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are in terms of specifically when it comes to entrepreneurship, what benefits it could potentially provide or bring to the continent.
Yeah. Look, I mean, entrepreneurs want to do business. They want to trade with each other. It's not like, hey, no, keep up the borders and leave me here. You give me a bigger market where I don't have to do conversions of currencies, where I don't have to do export taxes, enormous logistics cost. And you and I know that the cost of ferrying goods in trucks across borders is exorbitant, both direct costs and indirect costs, so bribing, inefficiencies, lack of infrastructure. So give me a market of a couple of 100 million people with one currency and no borders. Oh my goodness me, we are going to trade like there's no tomorrow. So open the roads, your government, and I'll do business. And the nice thing is the more people do business between cities and countries, the less conflict there will be, the more tolerance and understanding will be. Nobody goes to war with your customers. So generally speaking, that's bad business practice.
I like that phrase. I think I'll use that for the future.
Yeah, unless you're our friend from Moscow, that's a different discussion. So I'm not saying it's going to be a smooth journey. I remember living in Europe at the time when the EU was being formed, when the laws were being passed, when the transition phase is going to be messy, because human beings are generally messy. We resist change. We don't like this. We look after our interests. With one country wants this, the other country wants that. But the only advice I can offer to government ministers is do it. Go ahead, push with this. Create a single market in Africa, and the citizens will love you for it. There might be unions that don't want it. There might be central bankers that don't want it. There might be a few people with special interests that are protecting the turf that don't want it. But on the whole, it will be enormously beneficial to the continent. Plus, It will allow us to achieve economies of scale in delivering services. A healthcare company can amortize the healthcare delivery cost now over a few 100 million people, which means better quality for lower cost, healthcare, banking, financial services, transportation, and so forth. So suddenly we're not talking about a market with 20 million people, we're talking a market with 200 million people. Now people are going to invest in that much more. So I see enormous potential in that, but it's not going to happen overnight.
Yes, I agree. AFTA is a policy that will take a while to fully embed itself in society. There also needs to be a slight mindset change in terms of, as Africans, how we visualize the continent. No more seeing a continent as 54 or 55 different nations. We have to see it as one, a continent of over 1.3 billion people. So, AFTA is an initiative that has been fully live, but it will be something for the future in terms of how we see it going forward, how we see it actually taking actual effect on the ground. As we're coming to the end of our open conversation, in terms of looking to the future, in terms of what you're doing, where do you see Africa in 5 years' time?
I just want to reflect back on your point about this transformation that the continent is going through in different stages and at different speeds in different regions. Brings out a beautiful point that you raised, which is, what does it mean to be African?
Yes.
What is an African person? And I don't mean it in the color of the skin. I mean it in who do you identify with? Is there even such a thing as a South African, as a Ghanaian, as a Kenyan? Is there not subcultures in different regions in a country? In South Africa, there's 11 official languages. Are you a South African, or are you Ndebele? Are you a Zulu? Are you a Xhosa? What are you? Are you an Italian, or are you somebody from the south of Italy? Yet still able to identify as part of the European Union. So I do think we are going to go into an era where we have to live with inconsistencies, with different viewpoints, with a world that is consistently more 50 shades of gray. Horrible analogy. But there's a whole bunch of bad jokes we can come up with in closing. But the reality is we're going to have to tolerate a world where there's no more absolute answers, where you can be an African, a Kenyan, you can be speaking in a specific dialect and come from a local village and still identify across all things. I often joke that looking at Africa is going to be like being passionate about soccer. You may love your local football team, and when they play, be a big fan of them, but you still want to see the World Cup of football. You're still passionate about the sport. So it doesn't diminish the fact that you're Kenyan, doesn't diminish the fact that you can be a proud African, that you can be a proud supporter of more collaboration between the different families of African countries. So I'm extremely positive about the humanity that is found in Africa, that spirit of wanting to work together, of community, of understanding each other. We still sometimes, the pot boils over and there's little spots of intolerance and so forth, but I don't think it's anger against each other. It's anger against an increasingly volatile world. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, this volatile world where there's no more job security is the future. And the more we embrace that, the more we embrace the fact that we have lots of opportunities on the table coming up, the more I think we will calm down and not blame each other, but rather work with each other and collaborate towards a better continent.
So you've given a very practical, pragmatic, but also positive image in terms of how we see Africa as one. Also in terms of re-identifying or reclassifying what we see or how we describe a person as being African. If we look closer to home in terms of the future, where do you see yourself in terms of the work you'll be doing in 5 years' time?
Well, I love Elon Musk when he said, I actually don't mind if Tesla goes bankrupt, but if Tesla helped to open people's eyes towards renewable sources of power, whether it's the battery technology or the cars, to look at saving the world a bit or to start opening the doors at more opportunities. And I mean, I don't need to talk about Tesla or the speed at which electric vehicles are coming into the market. And I fully appreciate it's not the perfect solution yet. It's not that it solves all climate change issues. But so what we do is we help governments in many countries to help the citizens to become entrepreneurs through online courses. But it's irrelevant whether it's us. I hope other people see, my goodness me, if somebody as stupid as York can do it, then I can do it too. If I have 5,000 competitors wanting to improve the way education, entrepreneurial education is delivered on the continent, and the others do it better than us, I am so happy to go out of business because I want the hunger for knowledge that you so beautifully described. I want that to turn into practical businesses that grow, that impact communities, that stimulate the economy and then grow GDP.
Amazing. That's an extremely refreshing answer, to be honest, Jörg. I love that. So you've given us your mission or vision for the next 5 years in terms of making impact on the continent and changing lives, even if it's one life. The most important thing is to make an impact or set a trail for future generations or people to follow your path, or at least if they're being guided in the slightest sense. That's the most important thing.
Quote of the week.
As people, we often have quotes, mantras, proverbs, even affirmations that keep us going when times are challenging or when times are good. Do you have one that you sometimes live by or just keep in mind when you're doing the great work that you're doing?
There's many. Maybe this is a piece of advice, not for you, but for all the younger people out there who are giving it a shot, who are getting off the couch and trying to start a business. You will fail. You will fall on your face. You will fall on your face many times. But the advice that I would give you is don't take it personally. Failure is not a reflection of who you are. It's just a way for the market to give you feedback. It's the market being a very harsh teacher and telling you, hey, the way you brought this idea to market isn't quite perfect yet. Go back and refine it and come back and I'll give you another lesson. So don't judge yourself because you fail. Don't feel like you are not, you're not achieving everything that your parents or friends or other people think you should achieve. The fact that you got off, that you're trying, and that you are learning from your failures speaks volumes about what kind of human being you are. And so don't take it too personally. It's just feedback. And it's just a hard teacher telling you to go back and try a second time.
Failure is part of the process, as you've eloquently detailed there for us. You know, if you've never failed, you probably haven't tried hard enough. Everyone fails when starting out or when trying to progress, whether you've got a company with 100 employees that you're trying to scale to 200 or you're just a solo entrepreneur. So yes, loud and clear, failure is part of the process. As we're coming to the end of the conversation, do you have any closing remarks and final calls to action, York?
Yes, my closing remark is, remember, entrepreneurs are neither born nor are they made. Entrepreneurs are panel beaten. So go out there, get panel beaten. Every entrepreneur who's tried something took a lot of beatings, a lot of embarrassments, and suffered a lot of humiliation. You are not alone in this journey. Reach out, share it with the world, meet with other entrepreneurs. Don't be a loner. We are in this together. We are a family, and it's the world's most powerful family, the family of entrepreneurs.
Amazing. I couldn't have thought of a better way to close today's conversation. That has been extremely refreshing, inspiring, insightful, uplifting. Thank you, York. You've also given me some challenging in terms of my viewpoints and thoughts. I'm usually used to be on the other end of the microphone, just asking the questions, but it's good to have been contributed to a open discussion today. So thank you for that.
Teresa, thank you for having me on the show, and keep up this amazing initiative, because through this, you're helping more people access that knowledge. and satisfy that thirst for knowledge on the continent.
You've been an amazing guest, Jacques, so thank you for your time. I know you're extremely busy, so I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and we will speak soon.
Thank you, and thank you to all your listeners. Bye.
Thank you to everyone who has listened and stayed tuned to the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, or tell a friend about it. You can also rate, review us in Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcast. Thank you, and see you next week for the Unlocking Africa podcast.